Kash Patel never saw it coming. One moment he was settling into the usual rhythm of a congressional hearing. The next he was staring into the eyes of someone who wasn't there to play along, wasn't there to soften the truth, and wasn't there to let another carefully polished facade glide by untouched. Representative Jasmine Crockett walked into that chamber and tore straight through the performance. And what she exposed in those minutes wasn't just one man's shortcomings. It was the unraveling of an entire institution in real time. From the very first sentence she spoke, you could feel the temperature shift. This wasn't routine oversight. This was a stripping away of the mask, a public confrontation so sharp and unfiltered that the air almost cracked around it. She didn't ease into it. She didn't tiptoe. She went straight for the foundation, Patel's qualifications, or the lack of them. Her voice steady, her words precise. She pointed out what no one in Patel's circle wants repeated out loud.
FBI director in the history of the FBI, that is real, because you are the only one that never even served with the FBI prior to joining, yet we are supposed to believe that you were the greatest thing since sliced bread. I didn't ask you a question. Now, what I want to go through is to talk about why you are a failure and why, honestly, we just need to tell you bye-bye. I know that you got a little upset and you put on your show for your boss because it seems like you're trying to save your job when it came to talking to Senator Booker yesterday. But let's go through some of your failures. So before you were even confirmed, and I think one of my colleague from Georgia, pointed out that you were already targeting career officials so that you could direct illegal firings. Mind you, these cases that you were so upset about, which are the ones tied to Trump, the cases came through his handpicked FBI director. And frankly, when people sit around and say things like, oh, you know, we're happy because now we feel safe. I don't know who feels safe in this country except for the white supremacists, because I specifically as a black woman definitely don't feel safe. And frankly, my colleagues have been real nice to you today, and I applaud them, but I don't have the same demeanor because I know that multiple colleagues on this side of the aisle have faced death threats. In fact, somebody tried to kill one of my colleagues. And frankly, I don't know if this FBI or under your leadership, if those people would have been caught. I don't have any confidence in you. And if we start talking about the reasons that I lack confidence, we could start with you not just wanting to acknowledge some simple facts. Simple facts like the vast majority of the threats are coming from right-wing extremism. And I know my colleagues have tried to stress this, but I decided that I would maybe do it in a different way. Number one, I have a couple of UCs. Kim Buck, one of multiple Republicans receiving death threats for voting against Jim Jordan as House Speaker.
Without objection.
Another one, Republican lawmaker says she received death threats after voting against Jim Jordan in Speaker's race.
Without objection.
In addition, there was another one from another colleague who now is leaving Congress because they said that they were calling his wife anonymously and threatening her life to the extent that she ended up sleeping with a firearm.
Without objection.
Okay, so here's the deal. How are we supposed to have confidence when you're sitting up here telling the Senate yesterday that it will take you 14 years before you can get the FBI fully staffed to do their jobs? You're also now redirecting resources so that they can go and play ICE agents on the streets. You're getting rid of your most qualified people, and even when it came down to somebody that you consider to be a friend, you were posted up having some fancy dinner to the extent that you posted not only once erroneously, you posted twice erroneously as it relates to catching somebody, and then you want to go and say, let me take a victory lap. Because honestly, if it wasn't for parents deciding that they were going to turn in their child, it seems like y'all wouldn't have got there, even though he literally confessed online. So I'm confused about what it is that the FBI is doing except for trying to put on a show for the apprentice or whatever you want to call him. The day after all of this took place, there was domestic terrorism that was taking place at HBCUs. They were targeted. Yet I didn't hear anything from the FBI about what was going on. And again, black people kept saying, how did we end up in this? Because the numbers are so very clear that white supremacy is a problem. And honestly, I've not heard anything out of you today that makes me believe that you're going to do anything about the white supremacy problem, the one that is leading to children being killed, children being shot, as well as members of their community as they're worshiping in their churches.
The time of the gentlelady has expired. If the gentleman would like to respond to any of that. Well, I'll respond. Kash Patel, as I said when I introduced him, public defender, former prosecutor, top staffer on the House Intelligence Committee, Deputy Director of National Intelligence with the National Security Council, Chief of Staff at the Department of Defense, and FBI Director. I think that's pretty good resume for the guy who's now running the top law enforcement agency in our country, and we've seen all the stats that he's given to the committee on how much better they're doing at getting the bad guys than the previous guy was doing. With that, I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Patel, I think you're witnessing some auditions, clickbait auditions for the Academy Award for my Democratic colleagues. We'll see how they fare as they're on MSNBC later on today. But do you care, before I launch into my line of questioning, to respond to Ms. Crockett from Texas on that very elaborate and theatric display?
Here's what I've learned in my government service. I don't give a damn what they say about me as long as I'm succeeding in the mission. We're succeeding in the mission because the men and women of the FBI have never been empowered to do more work and to hit the streets harder than by President Trump's authorities and resources he's given us. And so all I care about is that we are capturing more child predators than ever before, taking more drugs off the streets than ever before, that we are capturing murderers at a significantly historic rate, and we're delivering this country the lowest murder rate in recorded history. That are facts that you cannot dispute. But you can come at me all you want. I don't care.
Thank you, Director, for that, and we appreciate your service. We appreciate the results speak for themselves, I think, pretty plainly, and your commitment not only to results, but to transparency, so we do appreciate that.
That he is the only FBI director in the institution's history who arrived having never actually served inside the FBI at all. Not in the field, not at a desk, not in any operational capacity. And yet here he was, sitting atop a law enforcement empire built on experience, specialization, and decades of institutional knowledge he'd never touched. Crockett didn't have to exaggerate. She simply said what the record shows. And that alone was enough to send Patel into visible discomfort. What made the moment so captivating wasn't just her words, but how she delivered them. Calm, unshaken, a little incredulous that this even needed to be explained. Because to her, the math is simple. If you put someone with no background in charge of one of the nation's most critical agencies, you don't get leadership. You get instability. You get confusion. You get decisions that don't come from training or knowledge, but from pressure, from influence, from whoever whispers loudest in your ear. And watching Patel try to hold eye contact while she laid out those facts felt like watching someone realize that their resume, so carefully defended, was no longer shielding them from accountability. But Crockett didn't stop at qualifications. She moved straight into something far heavier, the consequences of those shortcomings. She reminded everyone listening that this isn't about ego or political rivalry. It's about safety, real safety, safety that people depend on. She spoke about lawmakers, Republicans included, who had faced terrifying threats simply for vote choices. She described a wife forced to sleep with a weapon because anonymous callers kept promising harm. She cited the messages, the reports, the public statements her colleagues made after their own lives were shaken. These weren't rumors. These weren't talking points. These were stories the lawmakers themselves shared because the threats felt that urgent. And then she asked the question that hung over the entire hearing. How can anyone trust an FBI director to protect them when he won't even acknowledge where the threat is coming from? Crockett didn't gloss over the point. She highlighted the fact that Patel consistently avoids naming far-right extremism as the primary driver of political threats in the country, even as case after case, report after report, and testimony after testimony reinforces exactly that. She didn't turn it into a partisan battleground. She used examples from both sides of the aisle, showing that danger doesn't discriminate and neither should protection. And the more she laid out the evidence, the clearer it became that Patel's refusal to acknowledge the source of these threats wasn't neutrality, it was avoidance. Avoidance with consequences. The power in Crockett's critique wasn't in shouting or dramatics. It was in the way she connected institutional breakdown to lived experience. She talked about bomb threats at historically black colleges. She talked about vulnerable communities targeted again and again. She talked about children growing up in fear because the violence around them is being fueled by ideologies that those in authority refuse to name. And as she listed example after example, her frustration turned into something sharper, a disbelief that the person sitting before her still couldn't give a straightforward answer about what the FBI is prioritizing under his leadership. Patel's responses, or lack of them, only strengthened her point. Whenever she listed failures, he tried to pivot. Whenever she asked for clarity, he retreated into vague language. Whenever she reminded him of the gravity of his role, he responded as though the hearing were a personal attack instead of a public examination. That was the moment viewers could feel the shift. Crockett wasn't just questioning him anymore. She was pulling back the curtain on a pattern. She highlighted reports that Patel had targeted career officials even before he was confirmed, long-serving experts allegedly pressured or removed in ways critics claim were designed to consolidate loyalty rather than protect independence. She noted how this mirrored a broader trend, one seen in agencies across the government when political alignment mattered more than competence. Crockett didn't speculate recklessly. She framed everything as what has been reported, what colleagues have said, what observers have raised alarms about. But the implication was clear. Expertise was being replaced, hollowed out, weakened. And when she brought up Patel's claim that it would take 14 years to fully staff the FBI, the room seemed to pause. 14 years. An entire generation. Crockett pointed out how unbelievable that sounded, not because hiring takes time, but because it suggested a crisis inside the FBI so deep and so unresolved that the agency's own directors seemed to be waving the white flag. Instead of fixing the issue, Patel appeared to be normalizing it. And rather than strengthen domestic counter-extremism efforts, she accused him of diverting agents to act as immigration enforcers on the streets. Far from the threats she and her colleagues feared most, it was here that Crockett delivered one of the most searing moments in the entire exchange. She reminded Patel that even in a high-profile case he celebrated publicly, posting triumphantly online, agents didn't locate the suspect because of investigative brilliance. The break came from parents turning in their own child. She pointed out how the suspect had practically confessed online before the FBI made its move. And in her words, his attempt to take a victory lap only reinforced the image of someone more interested in optics than performance. Her critique wasn't just procedural. It was moral. It was about what an FBI director owes the public, not loyalty to an image, but loyalty to truth. Crockett then zoomed out to the bigger picture. She made it clear that Patel's leadership wasn't a standalone misstep. It was part of a larger deterioration within the justice system. A system where loyalty tests replaced professional vetting, where career experts were sidelined or dismissed, where warnings about domestic extremism were softened, reframed, or ignored because acknowledging them would be politically inconvenient. She didn't accuse Patel directly of orchestrating all of it. Instead, she painted him as the embodiment of what happens when institutions are reshaped to serve political narratives rather than national security. And for viewers paying attention, that's what made this moment feel like a reckoning instead of a hearing. Crockett wasn't just confronting Patel. She was documenting a shift in American governance, a shift where institutions once built on independence now bend under political pressure, a shift where oversight becomes a performance unless someone like Crockett refuses to let the performance stand. Every example she gave pulled the curtain back further. Every statistic, every story, every reference to threats that lawmakers and communities faced highlighted the widening gap between what the FBI is supposed to be doing and what many feel it is actually doing. And when she said she had no confidence in Patel, her words landed not as a partisan jab, but as a conclusion backed by everything she had laid out. Ignored threats, mismanaged priorities, hollowed out expertise, dangerous denialism. By the time she finished speaking, the room felt different. Patel looked smaller, less certain, the carefully rehearsed calm slipping. Crockett had taken control of the narrative, not with shouting, but with clarity. Her voice carried the weight of someone who knows what it feels like to walk through a world where threats aren't hypothetical, and who expects the people in power to understand those stakes. And in the aftermath, what stood out wasn't just what Crockett said, but why it resonated. Because underneath her words was a message everyone watching needed to hear. Institutions don't crumble in a day. They crumble slowly, quietly, when experience is replaced with obedience, when warnings are dismissed, when leaders refuse to confront the dangers right in front of them. Crockett's confrontation was a reminder that democracy doesn't survive on autopilot. It survives because people demand that those in authority do their jobs, fully, honestly, and without political distortion. That is why her exchange with Patel mattered. Not because of the tension, not because of the viral clips, but because she laid out the cost of ignoring what's happening inside the institutions meant to protect the country. She showed what real oversight looks like: uncompromising, fact-driven, rooted in lived reality rather than political theater. And she reminded viewers that silence from leaders doesn't create safety. It creates danger. If you want more deep-dive breakdowns that cut through the noise and reveal what's really happening behind the scenes, make sure you hit subscribe, tap like, and stay tuned. The more these institutions shift, the more important it becomes to watch closely, question boldly, and never take the performance at face value.